In today's episode of History's Most Influential Plants, we will again talk about a very particular plant, Herbum spica, sometimes known under its common, mundane name, spiky grass. While it may look uninteresting and even mundane at first, it has one particular characteristic that makes it special. So special that it occasionally left its marks on the history of France, the country it originates from. More specifically, spiky grass can be found high up in the Pyrenes, a tall mountain chain in the south of France that divides it from Spain. The grass looks inoffensive at first, but upon closer inspection one can notice that the grass is spiky and incredibly unpleasant to touch or to walk on with bare feet. The first source of spiky grass is a short entry that was found in the chronicles from the early 7th century. According to the chronicles, a traveler on his way from San Sebastian in northern Spain to Bordeaux on the southeastern French coast came across it on his way through the Pyrenes. Perplexed by this grass that stung him into his hand when he was climbing a particularly tricky ledge, he decided to rip some out and bring it with him for good luck. A befriended monk from Bordeaux drew an image of the man with the grass and wrote down a few lines about the whole adventure as a souvenir. The monk finishes the entry in his chronicles by explaining that the man and his spiky grass were lost at sea soon after. We find mention of it again in the diary from the 870s, written by a Frenchman called Timothée de Martingolais. Timothée was a vassal to the Count of Toulouse, and his lands were largely dominated by mountains. The sack of Paris by the Northmen in 850 deeply troubled the French nobility. When the news reached the lands of the Count of Toulouse, him and his vassals tried to come up with a way to fight back the northern invaders. It was during those times that one of Timothée's men, Charles Legland, heard rumors of a grass so spiky that walking on it could be immensely painful. Charles, in the hope of having found a way to get rid of the Viking aggressors, relayed the information up the chain of command to Timothée, and the information eventually reached the Count of Toulouse. Consequently, the nobleman ordered Timothée de Martingolais to gather a large amount of the plant and bring it to Paris so it could help in the war effort. 20 ox carts brought the grass to Paris, where it was planted on the sides of the river Seine to discomfort the Vikings into leaving. Attempts at stopping boats by putting grass in the water were stopped by the tendency of the grass to swim downstream when dumped in the river. Timothée de Martingolais' idea had failed, and the sacks of 862, 863, 864, and 865 made that abundantly clear. The fact that Timothée de Martingolais' diary was found in what is believed to be his grave in Norway seemed to let researchers believe that the whole endeavor might have ended somewhat unfortunately for him as well. After the disastrous attempts to use spiky grass against the Viking invasion, the plant was banished from common memory for centuries. Except for the occasional traveler that passed through the region where the grass grew, people forgot about the grass that was so unpleasantly spiky. That was until the July of 1760, when the Marquis de la Pépinière and his friend the biologist Benoit d'Aquiert came across it during an exploration travel through the Pyrenes. Both men had a passion for the French nature and regularly undertook journeys through France, during which they mapped out the local flora and fauna. One of those trips took them through the Oriental Pyrenees. Amongst the fully bearded vultures, short-toed eagles, white-throated dippers, and slightly collared marmots, they also discovered a particular type of grass that was so unlike any grass they had ever seen before. In his diary, Daguerre describes the discovery as follows. The Marquis and I had spent a quiet but cold night in our tents, and when I woke up, I wanted to step outside my tent and take in the fresh air of the morning. As soon as I put down my foot, I was taken aback by a sharp, painful feeling in my foot that felt like I was being stabbed by half a dozen needles. After careful examination, the Marquis and I were able to say at utmost certainty that what had caused such distress when I stepped onto it was a type of grass unlike any we had ever seen before. The grass one usually comes across as soft and generally pleasant to step on. The grass that I had the misfortune to rest my foot upon, however, had a hard spike at the extremity of each blade of grass. This characteristic made us name it Herbum spica. The plant had been formally identified by specialists in the field and given a Latin name, thus making its entrance into the realms of botany. Marquis and Daguerre stayed for another 3 days to examine the plant and take samples which they could take to their Parisian laboratory for further examinations. According to the lab notes, some of the most important botanists of their generation examined Herbum spica, and everyone could agree that indeed the grass was very unpleasant to walk upon with bare feet. Other than that, years of examination could not lead to any other discovery. Benoit Daguerre died a few years after the discovery, never having fully recovered from the fright that he had gotten on a fateful morning in July of 1760. His son, Etienne Daguerre, shared his father's passion for biology and walked in his footsteps. In 1770, 10 years after his father had discovered Herbum spica, the Royal Society of Botanic sent him to Port-au-Prince to make a catalogue of the plants there. Recently discovered sources, however, lead us to believe that there was another, secret reason as to why Etienne Daguerre was sent overseas. It appears that the French king Louis XV himself ordered Daguerre to bring samples of Herbum spica to the Caribbean in an attempt to grow it in plantations and sell it to other countries for profit. Huge sums were invested to grow large quantities in plantations around Port-au-Prince, but to no avail. The British Empire, the Spanish Kingdom, and the Habsburg dynasty failed to find any utility for the grass that was only particularly unpleasant to touch and walk on with bare feet, and stopped imports. When he climbed the throne in 1774, the new French king Louis XVI inherited a huge stock of Herbum spica and a whole of many millions in the country's treasury. The whole was particularly due to the important investments that had been made to the market Herbum spica. Louis XVI was never able to smoothen out the country's finances, which led to a number of revolts in the country and a certain number of issues for the royal family itself. During the following decades, Herbum spica was predominantly used to feed cattle in the French colonies, and one or the other rich plantation owners might have had it in their garden for decoration. It was only in 1889, at the famous Exposition Universelle in Paris, that marked the centennial of the French Revolution, that the plant briefly reached new heights of fame again. As many know, the central piece of the exposition was the Eiffel Tower, that had been built especially for the event, to show off the craftsmanship and innovative spirit of the French nation. What only a few know is that this decision was the result of years of debates and fights between two opposing fractions: the traditionalists around Jean-Louis Foucault and the progressives under Pierre-Yves Dutilleul. The latter were backed by the steel industry and the very influential Union of Tower Builders of the Republique, and argued in favor of the Eiffel Tower. The former, Foucault's traditionalists, were advocating for a more sober exposition that had a different highlight in mind. Foucault was an historian, but also dabbled in botany in his free time. It was his passion for plants that led him to discover Herbum spica and the role it had played in the downfall of the French monarchy. He therefore argued that the star of an exposition that celebrated the centennial of the revolution that had brought the end of the French monarchy should be one of its main actors. Foucault and his allies therefore wanted Herbum spica to be the main attraction of the exposition. Even though they had a majority at first, their project to grow spiky grass all over the capital was soon met with fierce resistance by highly upset Parisians. They had no desire to have spiky grass in the gardens, parks, and lanes of their city. It was just too unpleasant to sit and lie on during the picnics that the French liked so much during that time. In the end, the team around the Eiffel Tower won the fight, and the traditionalists had to come to terms with their defeat. A small patch of Herbum spica was embalmed and exposed in a small bell jar in the middle of the main exposition hall. That was all they got. In the years following the exposition, spiky grass did not lose its importance. It became a part of every respectable park, greenhouse, and botanical garden. Later, with the increasing popularity of private gardens, spiky grass became an inescapable for any gardening lover. Today, Herbum spica has made it from the height of the Pyrenes to the gardens of most people. It is a favorite amongst young and old, but despite that, only few know its history and the influence it has had on the world history. Next time you come across it, we hope that you will treat your friends to some of those anecdotes that we have just taught you here. We also hope that you have a thought for those whose lives were forever changed by it.